The rifle shot echoed through the valley, scattering a flock of startled birds into the golden sky as Virginia O'Malley stared at the letter in her trembling hands. The devastating truth about her brother's betrayal laid bare in black ink. It was 1878, and everything she thought she knew about family loyalty had just crumbled beneath her feet. Virginia folded the letter and tucked it into the pocket of her skirt, breathing in the crisp autumn air of Nevada City, California. The mining town bustled around her, oblivious to her inner turmoil. Men with dirt-stained faces hurried past, horses kicked up dust in the street, and the distant sound of a piano drifted from the saloon down the road. None of it penetrated the fog of betrayal that surrounded her. Her brother Thomas had stolen everything their parents' inheritance, the deed to their small ranch outside town, and even the savings Virginia had carefully hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom. The letter from the bank in Sacramento confirmed what she had begun to suspect weeks ago when Thomas suddenly departed for San Francisco with little more than a hurried goodbye. "Miss O'Malley," a voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Are you all right? You look pale as a ghost." Virginia blinked back tears and found herself looking into the concerned face of Mrs. Peterson, the shopkeeper's wife. "Yes, thank you. Just some unexpected news." She forced a smile and straightened her shoulders, unwilling to become the subject of town gossip. Her 23 years had taught her that survival in the West required strength, particularly for a woman on her own. Mrs. Peterson patted her arm sympathetically. "Well, if you need anything, you just come by the store. Mr. Peterson and I are always happy to help." Virginia thanked her and continued down the wooden sidewalk, her mind racing. Without the ranch or any money, she had few options. She could seek employment at one of the establishments in town, but respectable positions for women were limited, and she refused to work at the Gilded Lily, where painted ladies entertained minors and gamblers. As she rounded the corner, her thoughts still in turmoil, Virginia collided with something solid. Strong hands steadied her, preventing her from tumbling into the dusty street. "Whoa there," a deep voice said. "You all right, miss?" Virginia looked up into the bluest eyes she had ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face beneath a worn cowboy hat. The man stood at least a head taller than her, with broad shoulders and a kind expression that softened his weathered features. "I'm sorry," she murmured, stepping back and smoothing her skirt. "I wasn't watching where I was going. No harm done." He smiled, revealing a dimple in one cheek. "Hank Lawson at your service." He tipped his hat politely. "Virginia O'Malley," she replied automatically, then immediately wished she hadn't. The fewer people who connected her to Thomas O'Malley right now, the better. Recognition flashed in Hank's eyes. "O'Malley? Any relation to Thomas O'Malley?" Virginia stiffened. "He's my brother," she admitted reluctantly. "Do you know him?" Something guarded crossed Hank's face. "We've crossed paths. I've been working for the Sinclair Ranch these past 2 years." He hesitated. "I heard he left town rather suddenly." "Yes, he did." Virginia didn't elaborate. Whatever this cowboy knew about Thomas, she wasn't ready to discuss her family's disgrace with a stranger. An awkward silence stretched between them until Hank cleared his throat. "Well, Miss O'Malley, it was a pleasure meeting you. I should be getting back to the ranch. Mr. Sinclair's waiting on supplies." Virginia nodded, relieved at the reprieve. "Of course. Good day, Mr. Lawson." As he tipped his hat again and moved past her toward the general store, Virginia couldn't help but notice the easy grace with which he moved, despite his tall frame and broad shoulders. There was something reassuring about him, a steadiness that contrasted sharply with the chaos that had become her life. But she had more pressing concerns than a handsome cowboy. She needed to find a way to survive. The Nevada City Hotel stood at the end of Broad Street, a three-story wooden structure that had seen better days but still maintained a level of respectability that distinguished it from the bawdier establishments closer to the mines. Virginia had known Mrs. Hollister, the proprietress, since childhood. The bell above the door jingled as Virginia entered the hotel's small lobby. Mrs. Hollister, a stout woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, looked up from her ledger. "Virginia, dear." Her smile faded as she took in Virginia's expression. "What's wrong, child?" The kindness in the older woman's voice nearly undid Virginia's fragile composure. I need work, Mrs. Hollister, and a place to stay. I can't go back to the ranch." Mrs. Hollister's eyebrows rose, but she asked no questions. Instead, she closed her ledger and gestured for Virginia to follow her into the small office behind the front desk. "Sit down, dear," she said, pouring a cup of tea from the pot that always seemed to be brewing. "Now, tell me what's happened." Virginia took the cup with trembling hands and told Mrs. Hollister everything: how Thomas had gradually taken control of their finances after their parents' deaths from influenza 3 years ago. How he had convinced her it was for the best since she knew little about business matters, and how she had discovered, too late, that he had been systematically stealing from her. "The ranch is gone," she finished, her voice hollow. "He forged my signature on the deed and sold it to someone in San Francisco. The money from our parents, my savings, all of it gone. The bank says there's nothing they can do." Mrs. Hollister's face had grown increasingly grim as Virginia spoke. "That worthless scoundrel," she muttered. "Always thought he was too smooth by half." She reached across the desk to pat Virginia's hand. "You can stay here, dear. I've been needing help with the cleaning and serving meals. The pay isn't much, but you'll have a room and board." Relief washed over Virginia. "Thank you, Mrs. Hollister. I don't know what I would have done." "Nonsense. Your mother was one of my dearest friends. I won't see her daughter out on the street because of that no-good brother of yours." She stood up. "Come, I'll show you your room. You can start tomorrow." Virginia followed Mrs. Hollister up the narrow stairs to the 3rd floor, where a small but clean room awaited. It was a far cry from her comfortable bedroom at the ranch, but it represented safety and a chance to rebuild. After Mrs. Hollister left, Virginia sat on the narrow bed and finally allowed herself to cry for her lost home, for her parents who had trusted Thomas to care for her, and for her own blindness in not seeing the truth sooner. When the tears finally subsided, Virginia washed her face in the basin on the dresser and looked at her reflection in the small mirror. Her brown eyes were red-rimmed, and her chestnut hair had come loose from its pins. She looked nothing like the confident young woman who had awakened that morning still believing in her brother's love. "You will survive this," she told her reflection firmly. "You will find a way to make things right." As darkness fell over Nevada City, Virginia lay on the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the hotel settling around her. Tomorrow would begin her new life, one without the protection of family or wealth, but one that would be entirely her own. The next few weeks passed in a blur of hard work and adjustment. Virginia rose before dawn each day to help prepare breakfast for the hotel guests, then spent hours changing linens, scrubbing floors, and assisting Mrs. Hollister with whatever tasks needed attention. The work was exhausting but kept her too busy to dwell on her losses. It was nearly a month after her first encounter with Hank Lawson that their paths crossed again. Virginia was returning from the market with supplies for the hotel kitchen when she noticed a commotion near the bank. A crowd had gathered and the sheriff was trying to restore order. Curiosity drew her closer, where she overheard fragments of excited conversation. "Tried to rob the bank in broad daylight. Sheriff Taylor shot one of them." Other one got away on horseback. Chased him out of town. As Virginia moved to the edge of the crowd, she spotted a familiar figure speaking with the sheriff, Hank Lawson, his expression grave as he gestured toward the mountains. She waited until the sheriff moved away before approaching him. "Mr. Lawson, what's happening?" He turned, surprise flickering across his face when he recognized her. "Miss O'Malley." He touched the brim of his hat. "There was an attempted robbery. 2 men rode into town and tried to hold up the bank. Sheriff got one of them, but the other escaped." He glanced toward the distant hills. "Sheriff's forming a posse to go after him." "Are you joining them?" she asked, noting the determined set of his jaw. "Yes, madam. I know these hills better than most." He hesitated, studying her face. "How have you been? I heard about what happened with your brother and the ranch." Heat rushed to Virginia's cheeks, so her family's disgrace was common knowledge. "News travels fast," she said stiffly. "It's a small town," Hank replied, his voice gentle. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry, what he did wasn't right." Before Virginia could respond, the sheriff called for the posse members to gather. "I need to go," Hank said. "Take care of yourself, Miss O'Malley." She watched him mount his horse and ride out with the other men, a strange mixture of emotions churning inside her. His simple expression of sympathy had touched something deep within her, a place that had been numb since Thomas's betrayal. That evening, as Virginia served dinner to the hotel guests, Mrs. Hollister pulled her aside. "Did you hear? They caught the bank robber. He was hiding in one of the abandoned mining shacks up in the hills." "Was anyone hurt?" Virginia asked, thinking of Hank riding out with the posse. "No, thank goodness. But here's the interesting part." Mrs. Hollister lowered her voice. "They found papers on him connecting him to several robberies across 3 states. And guess whose name was mentioned in those papers?" A chill ran down Virginia's spine. "Thomas." Mrs. Hollister nodded grimly. "It seems your brother has fallen in with a dangerous crowd, dear. The sheriff wants to speak with you tomorrow." Virginia barely slept that night, her mind racing with questions. What had Thomas gotten himself involved in? Could his theft of their family's money be connected to something even worse? The thought that her brother might be a criminal was almost more painful than his betrayal of her trust. Sheriff Taylor was waiting for her in his office the next morning. He was a gruff man in his 50s who had served as Nevada City's lawman for over a decade. "Miss O'Malley," he greeted her, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Thank you for coming." "Mrs. Hollister said you wanted to speak with me about my brother," Virginia said, getting straight to the point. The sheriff nodded, his expression grim. "I'm afraid your brother may be involved with the Blackburn gang. They've been operating throughout California and Nevada, robbing banks and stagecoaches. The man we caught yesterday, Jim Reeves, had letters that mentioned your brother by name." Virginia's hands twisted in her lap. "What kind of involvement?" "The letters suggest he's been providing information about potential targets' banks with large gold shipments, wealthy passengers on stagecoach routes." Sheriff Taylor's eyes were sympathetic but direct. "Did Thomas ever mention anyone named Reeves or Blackburn to you?" "No," Virginia shook her head. "Thomas never discussed business with me. He always said I wouldn't understand." The sheriff sighed. "We've sent telegrams to authorities in San Francisco. They're looking for him, but if he's smart, he's probably already moved on." "What will happen if they find him?" Virginia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He'll face charges for his involvement with the gang, in addition to any crimes he committed here." The sheriff leaned forward. "Miss O'Malley, I need to ask, is there anywhere your brother might go? Any friends or relatives who would hide him?" "No," Virginia said, the word bitter on her tongue. "We have no other family, and after what he did, I doubt he'd come back here." As Virginia left the sheriff's office, Her mind swirling with this new revelation about Thomas, she nearly collided with Hank Lawson for the second time. "We've got to stop meeting like this, Miss O'Malley," he said with a gentle smile that faded when he saw her expression. "Are you all right?" "The sheriff told me about Thomas," she said, her voice hollow. "About his possible connection to the Blackburn gang." Hank's face softened with concern. "I'm sorry, that's a heavy burden to bear. Did you know?" she asked suddenly. "When you said you'd crossed paths with Thomas, did you suspect he was involved in something illegal?" Hank hesitated. "I had suspicions," he admitted. "Your brother always seemed to have more money than a small rancher should. And he asked a lot of questions about the gold shipments that come through the Sinclair ranch from the mining operations." He shook his head. "But I had no proof, just a feeling that something wasn't right." Virginia felt tears stinging her eyes and blinked them away furiously. "I should have known too. I lived with him every day and I never saw what was happening right in front of me." "Hey," Hank said softly, touching her arm lightly. "This isn't your fault. Men like your brother are good at hiding their true nature, especially from those who love them." His kindness nearly undid her. "I should go. Mrs. Hollister will be wondering where I am." "Let me walk you back to the hotel," Hank offered. "I'm heading that way anyhow." They walked in silence for a moment, the morning bustle of Nevada City continuing around them. Finally, Virginia spoke. "Thank you for not judging me for what Thomas did. Most people in town can barely look at me now." "People can be quick to assign blame where it doesn't belong," Hank replied. "But anyone who knows you wouldn't hold you responsible for your brother's actions." Virginia glanced at him. "You don't know me, Mr. Lawson." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I know enough. Mrs. Hollister speaks very highly of you, says you're the hardest worker she's ever had and never complained despite the circumstances that brought you to her door." He met her gaze. "That tells me more about your character than any rumors about your brother ever could." They had reached the hotel and Virginia paused at the entrance. "Thank you for walking with me." "My pleasure, Miss O'Malley." He tipped his hat. "I hope to see you again soon." As Virginia watched him walk away, she felt something stir within her that she hadn't felt since, before Thomas's betrayal, a flicker of hope that perhaps her life wasn't completely in ruins after all. The weeks that followed brought a gradual adjustment to Virginia's new circumstances. The work at the hotel was demanding but satisfying in its own way. Mrs. Hollister proved to be a fair employer and something of a surrogate mother, offering advice and companionship that eased Virginia's loneliness. The scandal of Thomas's connection to the Blackburn gang gradually faded as newer gossip captured the town's attention. Virginia still endured occasional whispers and stares, but they bothered her less as time passed, and she established her own reputation separate from her brother's misdeeds. She saw Hank Lawson with increasing frequency. At first, their encounters seemed coincidental. He would stop by the hotel on errands for the Sinclair ranch, or they would cross paths at church on Sundays. But soon it became clear that he was finding reasons to be in town more often than his work required. On a crisp Saturday in November, Hank appeared at the hotel just as Virginia was finishing her morning chores. "Miss O'Malley," he greeted her, hat in hand. "I was wondering if you might be free to take a walk this afternoon. The weather's fine, and I thought you might enjoy some time away from the hotel." Virginia hesitated. No man had shown interest in her since Thomas had chased away her last suitor over a year ago, claiming the young man was only after their family's money. The irony of that now made her wince. "It's just a walk," Hank added, seeming to sense her uncertainty. "Nothing improper." Mrs. Hollister, who had been pretending not to listen from behind the front desk, spoke up. "Go on, Virginia. You've been working non-stop for weeks. A bit of fresh air will do you good." With Mrs. Hollister's endorsement removing any concerns about propriety, Virginia agreed. "I would like that, Mr. Lawson. Let me get my shawl." They walked along the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to pine-covered hills. The afternoon sun cast long shadows, and the air carried the scent of wood smoke from nearby chimneys. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Lawson," Virginia said after they had walked in comfortable silence for a while. "You seem to know all about my unfortunate circumstances, but I know very little about you." Hank smiled. "Not much to tell, really. I was born in Missouri, came west with my parents when I was 10, lost them both to cholera near Fort Laramie. A family took me in for a few years, then I struck out on my own at 16. He glanced at her. "Been working cattle ranches ever since, moving from place to place until I ended up at the Sinclair spread 2 years ago." "You've been on your own a long time," Virginia observed. "Yes, madam. Makes a man appreciate good company when he finds it." His blue eyes met hers briefly before looking ahead. "What about you? Before everything happened, what was your life like?" Virginia considered the question. "Sheltered, I suppose. After our parents died, Thomas became even more protective, or so I thought at the time. Now I realize he was isolating me to make his deceptions easier." She shook her head. "I had a few friends in town, attended church socials, helped with the ranch accounts. Nothing very exciting." "Any beaux?" Hank asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Forgive me, that's too personal." "It's all right," Virginia assured him. "There was one young man, Henry Davies. He courted me briefly last year, but Thomas disapproved and eventually drove him away." She gave a humorless laugh. "Thomas claimed Henry was only interested in our family's money. In light of what happened, that accusation seems particularly hypocritical." They reached a small clearing that offered a view of the valley below. The town of Nevada City spread out before them, smoke rising from chimneys, the distant sound of activity carrying on the clear air. "It's beautiful up here," Virginia said, wrapping her shawl tighter against the cool breeze. "One of my favorite spots," Hank agreed. "I come here sometimes to think. Helps put things in perspective." Virginia studied his profile, the strong jaw, straight nose, and thoughtful eyes. "What things do you need to put in perspective, Mr. Lawson?" He turned to her with a half-smile. "Call me Hank, please." After she nodded, he continued, "Life, mostly. What I want from it, where I'm heading." His gaze held hers. "For a long time I was content just drifting from ranch to ranch, never putting down roots. Lately I've been wondering if that's enough." Something in his tone made Virginia's heart beat faster. She looked away, back toward the town. "And have you reached any conclusions?" "Some," he said softly. "But I'm still figuring things out." As the sun began to dip toward the western mountains, they made their way back to town. At the hotel entrance, Hank paused. "Thank you for walking with me, Virginia," he said, using her given name for the first time. "I enjoyed your company." "As did I," she replied honestly. "Thank you for the invitation. Would it be too forward to ask if I might call on you properly tomorrow? Perhaps take you to dinner at the cafe?" Virginia felt a flutter of both excitement and trepidation. "I would like that, Hank." His smile brightened his entire face. "Until tomorrow, then." As she watched him walk away, Virginia acknowledged to herself that Hank Lawson was becoming more than just a friendly face in her new life. The realization was both exhilarating and frightening. After Thomas's betrayal, trusting anyone, especially a man, seemed a dangerous proposition. Yet something about Hank's straightforward manner and kind eyes made her want to believe that not everyone would hurt her as her brother had. Their dinner the following evening was pleasant, with conversation flowing easily between them. Hank told stories of his years working on various ranches across the West, and Virginia shared memories of her parents and her childhood in Nevada City before Thomas's betrayal had tarnished those recollections. "Your eyes light up when you talk about your father's orchard," Hank observed as they finished their meal. "You must miss it." Virginia nodded, a pang of loss squeezing her heart. "The apple trees were my favorite place on the ranch. In spring, when they were in bloom, the scent was heavenly. And in fall, my mother and I would spend days making preserves and pies." She sighed. "I wonder who owns it now. Thomas sold the property to someone in San Francisco, but I never learned who." "Would you want it back if you could?" Hank asked. The question caught her off guard. I don't know. It would be like having a piece of my parents returned to me, but there are so many painful memories there now as well." She met his gaze. "Besides, it's impossible. I could never afford to buy it back, even if I saved every penny Mrs. Hollister pays me for the rest of my life." Hank nodded thoughtfully but said nothing more on the subject. In the weeks that followed, Hank became a regular visitor at the hotel. He would stop by whenever he was in town, sometimes just for a brief conversation, other times to invite Virginia for a walk or a meal. Mrs. Hollister watched their growing attachment with approval, occasionally adjusting Virginia's schedule to allow her time to see Hank. December brought snow to the mountains around Nevada City, and the town transformed with Christmas decorations. Virginia threw herself into helping Mrs. Hollister prepare the hotel for the holiday season, decorating the lobby with pine boughs and red ribbons. The work kept her mind off the fact that this would be her first Christmas without family. On a snowy afternoon a week before Christmas, Virginia was arranging a display of candles in the hotel lobby when the door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air and Hank, his coat dusted with snowflakes. "Hank, I wasn't expecting you today," she greeted him with a smile that faded when she saw his serious expression. "What's wrong? Could we speak privately?" he asked, glancing around the lobby where several hotel guests were warming themselves by the fire. Concerned, Virginia led him to Mrs. Hollister's small office, which was empty at this hour. "What is it? Has something happened?" Hank removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "I received a telegram from a friend in San Francisco this morning. He's a deputy marshal there." He met her eyes. "They've arrested Thomas." Virginia sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "Thomas? He's in jail," Hank nodded. "They caught him trying to board a ship to Panama. He had stolen money and forged papers in his possession." A strange numbness spread through Virginia. She had known this day might come, but the reality of it still shocked her. "What happens now?" "He'll stand trial in San Francisco for the forgery and theft. If convicted, he'll likely serve several years in prison." Hank knelt beside her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. "There's more, Virginia. My friend included some information about the ranch in his telegram." Virginia steeled herself. "What about it?" "It wasn't sold to someone in San Francisco after all. Thomas used a San Francisco lawyer to handle the transaction, but the actual buyer was local." Hank hesitated. "It was John Sinclair, my employer." Virginia stared at him in disbelief. "Mr. Sinclair bought our ranch, but why wouldn't he say anything? He must know I'm in town working at the hotel." "He didn't know at first. The transaction was completed through intermediaries, and Thomas used a false name for you on some of the documents to hide what he was doing. By the time Mr. Sinclair realized the property had belonged to your family, you had already established yourself here at the hotel." Confusion swirled through Virginia's mind. "I don't understand. Why are you telling me this now?" Hank took a deep breath. "Because Mr. Sinclair has offered to sell the property back to you at a fair price, with terms that would allow you to pay over time from the ranch's proceeds." Virginia's heart raced. "But that's That's impossible. I have no money for a down payment, no way to operate a ranch on my own. You wouldn't be on your own, Hank said quietly, his blue eyes serious. I've been saving my wages for years, hoping to buy a small spread of my own someday. I have enough for a down payment. He squeezed her hands gently. Virginia, I'm asking if you would consider a partnership in the ranch and in life. Virginia's breath caught in her throat as she realized what he was proposing. Hank, are you? Are you asking me to marry you? A flush crept up his neck, but his gaze remained steady. I know it's sudden and perhaps not the romantic proposal you deserved, but yes, I am. He smiled softly. I've grown to care for you deeply these past months. Your strength, your kindness, despite everything you've endured, you're the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Tears filled Virginia's eyes. But the ranch, I can't ask you to take on that burden for me. You're not asking, I'm offering. And it's not a burden, it's an opportunity for both of us. He released one of her hands to gently brush a tear from her cheek. We can rebuild what was taken from you, make it our own, together. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within Virginia, a place that had been wounded by Thomas's betrayal, but wasn't beyond healing. In Hank's steady gaze, she saw not just affection but a promise of partnership and respect. This isn't just about the ranch, Virginia, Hank continued. Even if there was no property involved, I would still be asking you to be my wife. The ranch is just a place. It's you I want to build a life with. Virginia searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or deception, but found only honest emotion. I care for you too, Hank. These months knowing you have been the brightest part of my life since everything fell apart. She took a shaky breath. But marriage is a serious commitment. Are you certain this is what you want? More certain than I've ever been about anything, he replied without hesitation. Virginia thought of the life they could build together, restoring her family's ranch, creating new memories to replace the tainted ones, waking each day to Hank's steadfast presence. The possibility of happiness stretched before her like the view from the clearing above town, vast and full of promise. Yes, she said softly, then with growing confidence. Yes, I will marry you, Hank. The brilliance of his smile warmed her to her core. He leaned forward, hesitating briefly before pressing his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Virginia responded, her heart soaring with a joy she had thought lost to her forever. When they parted, Hank rested his forehead against hers. We will mend what's broken, Virginia. I promise you that. In that moment, surrounded by the scent of pine boughs and warmed by Hank's embrace, Virginia believed him. News of their engagement spread quickly through Nevada City. Most reactions were positive misses. Hollister was delighted, though sad to lose her best worker, and even Sheriff Taylor offered his congratulations when he encountered them on the street. A few tongues wagged about the speed of their courtship, but such gossip held little power to hurt Virginia now that she had found happiness with Hank. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church on Pine Street, with Mrs. Hollister standing as Virginia's witness and Mr. Sinclair as Hank's. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with Virginia wearing a pale blue dress that Mrs. Hollister had helped her make for the occasion. I, Hank, take you, Virginia, to be my lawfully wedded wife, Hank said, his voice steady as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. As Virginia repeated her vows, she felt the final pieces of her broken heart mending, not back to what it had been before Thomas's betrayal, but into something new, stronger for having been tested, more appreciative of the love she had found. Their first glimpse of the ranch came on a clear January morning, the wagon cresting the final hill to reveal the O'Malley property spread out before them. The two-story farmhouse stood much as Virginia remembered it, though the white paint had weathered and one of the porch railings sagged. Behind it, the barn and outbuildings looked solid if neglected, and beyond them, the apple orchard stretched in neat rows, the bare branches glistening with frost. "It's smaller than I remembered," Virginia murmured, drinking in the sight of her childhood home. Hank reached for her hand. "But it's ours now. We'll make it thrive again." The first months were harder than either had anticipated. Winter lingered, delaying their planting plans, and the house required more repairs than they had expected. The initial payment to Mr. Sinclair stretched their combined savings thin, leaving little for emergencies. But they worked together, rising before dawn to tend to the small herd of cattle Hank had purchased and spending evenings by lamplight planning for the spring planting. Virginia discovered that the years of watching her father manage the ranch had taught her more than she realized, and Hank's experience as a ranch hand proved invaluable as they brought the neglected property back to life. By April, the apple trees were in bloom, filling the air with the sweet scent that Virginia had so missed. She stood among them one evening, watching as the setting sun gilded the delicate pink blossoms, and felt Hank's arms encircle her from behind. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. "Very," she replied, leaning back against his chest. "Though I'll be happier still when we see if these trees will bear fruit this year. The orchard was always the most profitable part of the ranch." "I've been thinking about that," Hank said, turning her to face him. "What if we expanded the orchard? There's that section of land to the south that gets good sun but isn't much use for grazing. If we planted more trees, in a few years we could be supplying apples to half the county." Virginia smiled at his enthusiasm. "That's a wonderful idea. My father always said the soil here was perfect for apples." She touched his face gently. "You've brought so much life back to this place, Hank, to me as well." He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "We did it together." As spring gave way to summer, Virginia realized she was carrying their first child. The discovery filled her with equal parts joy and trepidation. "Are you sure we're ready?" she asked Hank one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "The ranch is just beginning to turn a profit, and there's still so much to do. Families have been raising children and ranches together since the West was settled," Hank reminded her. "Besides, there's never a perfect time. Life happens while we're making other plans." His confidence reassured her, as it always did. In the months that followed, as her body changed and the ranch continued to flourish under their care, Virginia found herself looking forward to the future with an optimism that would have seemed impossible in the dark days after Thomas's betrayal. In late January, with snow piled against the farmhouse and a fire crackling in the hearth, Virginia gave birth to a son they named James Henry Lawson, after both their fathers. The baby had Hank's blue eyes and a dusting of dark hair that Virginia was certain would turn to her chestnut shade as he grew. Holding her son in the same bedroom where she had been born 24 years earlier, Virginia felt the circle of her life completing in the most unexpected and beautiful way. The pain of her brother's deception hadn't disappeared entirely, perhaps. It never would, but it had been overshadowed by the joy she had found with Hank, and now their child. Spring brought new growth to the ranch, and a surprise visitor. Virginia was hanging laundry in the yard, baby James sleeping in a basket nearby, when she heard the sound of an approaching horse. Looking up, she was startled to see Sheriff Taylor riding toward the house. "Mrs. Lawson," he greeted her, tipping his hat as he dismounted. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Sheriff," Virginia replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing like that. I've brought some news I thought you'd want to hear in person." He glanced at the sleeping baby. "Your little one's grown since I saw him in town last month." Virginia smiled proudly. "He has. He's already trying to roll over." She gestured toward the house. "Would you like some coffee? Hank's out checking the herd, but he should be back soon." The sheriff accepted, and they settled at the kitchen table with steaming cups. "I received a telegram from San Francisco yesterday," Sheriff Taylor began. "Your brother's trial concluded. He was sentenced to 5 years in state prison." Virginia absorbed the news with a strange sense of detachment. Thomas seemed like a figure from another life, now a painful chapter that had closed when she married Hank and returned to the ranch. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Lawson. I know it's not easy news to hear, regardless of what he did." "Thank you for telling me, Sheriff." Virginia looked out the window at the apple orchard, now in full spring bloom. 5 years is a long time, but he'll still be a young man when he's released. "That's true," the sheriff agreed, studying her with concern. "Does it worry you, the thought of him being free again someday?" Virginia considered the question. It did once, but not anymore. She gestured to the home around them, the life she and Hank had built. "Thomas can't take anything from me now that I couldn't rebuild. I've learned that the hard way." When Hank returned from the fields, Virginia shared the news about Thomas. He listened silently, then drew her into his arms. "How do you feel about it?" he asked, his chin resting on top of her head. "Sad," Virginia admitted. "Sad for what might have been, for the brother I thought I had." She pulled back to look at him. "But mostly I feel free. Like this was the final thread connecting me to that time in my life." Hank brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Your brother's actions led you to the lowest point in your life, but they also led you to me, to this ranch, to James. I can't be sorry for that, even while I wish you hadn't had to suffer." "Nor can I," Virginia agreed. "It's strange how life works, isn't it? How the worst moments can lead to the best ones if you survive them." The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. Their apple orchard expanded as Hank had envisioned, and by the time James was walking, the Lawson Ranch was known throughout the county for its quality fruit. They added more cattle, built a new barn, and welcomed a daughter, Emma Rose, when James was 3. Virginia never heard directly from Thomas during his imprisonment, though occasionally news would reach her through Sheriff Taylor or other contacts. He had become a model prisoner, working in the prison library and teaching other inmates to read. The information brought her a measure of peace. Perhaps her brother was finding redemption in his own way. One autumn afternoon, as Virginia and Hank sat on the porch watching 7-year-old James and 4-year-old Emma playing in the yard, a rider approached the ranch. Virginia shaded her eyes against the setting sun, trying to identify the visitor. "You recognize him?" she asked Hank, who had stood for a better view. "No," Hank replied, his posture tense. Years of hard work had added strength to his already impressive frame. And at 32, he was in his prime, a fact that reassured Virginia as the stranger drew closer. The man reined in his horse at the edge of the yard, removing his hat to reveal dark hair streaked with premature gray. He was thinner than Virginia remembered, his once smooth face now lined, but she would have known him anywhere. "Thomas," she whispered, her hand finding Hank's for support. Her brother dismounted slowly, his movements suggesting stiffness from the long ride. He stood beside his horse, hat in hand, making no move to approach the porch. "Virginia," he called, his voice hoarse, "I wasn't sure you'd still be here." Virginia felt Hank's hand tighten around hers. "What do you want me to do?" he murmured. She took a deep breath. "It's all right. I need to speak with him." To the children, who had stopped playing to stare at the newcomer, she called, "James, take Emma inside, please." Help yourselves to the cookies on the kitchen table." Once the children had scampered inside, Virginia descended the porch steps, Hank a reassuring presence just behind her. "Hello, Thomas," she said, stopping several feet from her brother. "You're out of prison," he nodded. "3 months ago, good behavior." His eyes moved to Hank, then back to her. "You're looking well, Virginia. The ranch, too." "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice steadier than she had expected. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "To apologize, though I know it's inadequate." He gestured vaguely at the ranch. "For everything I took from you, the money, the ranch, your trust." His eyes, so like her own, held genuine regret. "There's no excuse for what I did. I was greedy and selfish, caught up in a life that seemed exciting at the time." "Prison changed your perspective, I imagine," Hank said, his tone neutral but watchful. Thomas gave a humorless laugh. "That it did, Mr. Lawson, Hank Lawson, Virginia's husband." Recognition dawned on Thomas's face. "The cowboy who worked for Sinclair," he nodded slowly. "I remember you." An awkward silence fell until Virginia spoke again. "Those were your children you saw. James is 7, Emma 4. Something like longing crossed Thomas's face. "They're beautiful, Virginia. You have a fine family." "Yes," she agreed. "I do." Thomas seemed to gather his courage. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm truly sorry. And—" He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew an envelope. "I wanted to give you this." Virginia accepted the envelope cautiously. "What is it?" "Money," Thomas said simply. "Not all that I took from you. I lost most of that before I was arrested. But I've been working since my release, saving everything. It's not much, but it's a start." Virginia stared at the envelope in her hand, emotions warring within her. After a moment, she held it back out to him. "Keep it, Thomas. Use it to build a new life for yourself." He blinked in surprise. "But we don't need it," she interrupted gently. "Look around you. We've rebuilt everything you took, made it better than it was. We're happy, Thomas." Her brother's eyes filled with tears. "You're a better person than I ever was, Virginia. Always were." He took the envelope back with trembling hands. "Thank you. Where will you go now?" Hank asked, his arm slipping around Virginia's waist. "Oregon, I think. I have a job offer on a logging operation near Portland." Thomas replaced his hat, preparing to leave. "I won't bother you again, Virginia. I just needed to see you, to say these things in person." Virginia studied her brother's face, seeing in it the boy who had taught her to fish in the creek behind the orchard, the young man who had comforted her after their parents' deaths. Despite everything that had happened, he was still her only blood relative, the only one who shared her memories of their childhood. "Write to me sometimes," she said impulsively. "Let me know how you're doing." Thomas looked startled, then deeply moved. "I will, I promise." He hesitated. "May I? Would it be all right if I met my niece and nephew before I go?" Virginia glanced at Hank, who gave a slight nod after studying her face. "Briefly," she agreed. "They know they have an uncle, but not the details." The children were curious but shy when introduced to their uncle. James, with his father's direct gaze, solemnly shook Thomas's hand, while Emma hid partially behind Virginia's skirts, peeking out with interest. Thomas spoke with them kindly, but didn't linger, seeming to understand that his welcome was limited. As he prepared to mount his horse, Thomas turned to Virginia one last time. "I never deserved a sister like you, but I'm grateful for you, all the same." Virginia felt Hank's steady presence beside her as they watched Thomas ride away, the setting sun casting long shadows across the land they had reclaimed and made their own. The sight of her brother's departing figure stirred a complex mixture of emotion, sadness for what had been lost, gratitude for what had been found, and a new sense of closure that she hadn't realized she needed. "Are you all right?" Hank asked softly when Thomas had disappeared from view. Virginia leaned into his embrace. Yes, better than I expected to be. She looked up at the home they had rebuilt together. He can't hurt us anymore. Whatever demons drove him to betray me, they're his to wrestle with now, not mine. Hank pressed a kiss to her temple. You're an extraordinary woman, Virginia Lawson. Every day you make me proud to be your husband. She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face, still handsome at 34, with new lines of experience that only enhanced his steady blue gaze. And you, Hank Lawson, are the man who taught me to trust again, to believe in new beginnings. She smiled. You kept your promise. We did mend what was broken. Together, he reminded her, echoing the word that had become something of a motto for them over the years. As the evening deepened around them, Virginia took Hank's hand and led him back to the house where their children waited. The pain of her brother's betrayal had faded to a distant ache, overshadowed by the joy she had found in the life she and Hank had built. Whatever the future held, challenges, sorrows, or triumphs, they would face it as they had faced everything since that snowy day when Hank had asked her to be his wife. Together, with love and determination, mending whatever needed repair along the way. Years passed, and the Lawson Ranch flourished. Their apple orchard became renowned throughout California, with buyers coming from as far as San Francisco for their harvest. James grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's talent for working with livestock, while Emma developed her mother's head for business, keeping the ranch accounts with meticulous precision from the time she was 12. Thomas kept his promise to write, his letters arriving several times a year with news of his life in Oregon. He had found steady work, married a widow with 2 young children, and seemed to have found the redemption he sought. Virginia responded to each letter with news of the family and the ranch, gradually rebuilding a relationship with her brother that, while never as close as it had once been, offered both of them a sense of healing. On a warm afternoon in the summer of 1898, as Virginia and Hank celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with friends and neighbors gathered in the orchard, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The betrayal that had once seemed like the end of her world had instead been the beginning of something far better than she could have imagined. James, now 19, played the fiddle he had inherited from his grandfather, while Emma, 16 and blooming into a beauty, danced with the son of a neighboring rancher. Hank, his dark hair now streaked with silver but his blue eyes as bright as ever, approached Virginia with 2 glasses of cider. "A penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Lawson," he said, handing her a glass. Virginia smiled at the man who had been her rock for 2 decades. "I was just thinking about how fortunate I am, how one moment of kindness from a cowboy changed the course of my life." Hank's eyes softened with memory. "You mean when I kept you from falling in the street? As I recall, you were so distracted you nearly knocked me over." "I was reading a letter from the bank," Virginia remembered, "learning that Thomas had stolen everything." She shook her head in wonder. "If I hadn't been on that street corner at that exact moment, we would have met some other way," Hank said with certainty. "Some things are meant to be, Virginia." As the celebration continued around them, Virginia leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, watching their children, their friends, the life they had built together. From the depths of betrayal, she had found her way to the greatest happiness she could have imagined, not despite the hardship, but because of how it had shaped her, strengthened her, and led her to the love that had healed her broken heart. "You're right," she murmured, looking up at Hank with eyes full of love. "Some things are meant to be." In the golden light of the orchard, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and love, Virginia and Hank Lawson stood together as they had for 20 years, partners in all things. their once wounded hearts long since mended by the steady devotion they had shown each other through every season of their lives.